ibn Rabi'ah, who, when he was in like a distraught state, kind of wounded and bleeding in front of their home. It's good? Yeah. Adas came and spoke to him, and they had a conversation on who the prophet Jonah, Yunus, alayhi salam, was, etc. We talked about the dua made at Taif, prophets in a very distressed state. And when the angel comes, how the prophet still demonstrates mercy, like even in that moment of difficulty. Do people remember this? Yeah. So a couple of things that we want to close off with in relation to the incident of Taif, and then we'll talk about two other things today. The Prophet ﷺ stops on his return to Mecca. He stops at a city called Nakhla, where he prays tahajjud and is met with a group of jinn, and also how he actually gets back into Mecca, because his leaving from Mecca to go to Banu Taqif was to find a new place for the community, in the absence of security in Mecca and the overt presence of persecution. He now is in a place where he's got to figure out how to get back in with no protection, right? So we'll kind of talk about some of these things, and then we'll wrap up with Isha, probably around like between 8:15 and 8:30. So in the aftermath of Taif, one of the things that we kind of walk away from this with is that by the intents and purposes of kind of success, it wasn't successful as a venture, right? Like the Prophet ﷺ went to the Banu Taqif thinking that they would welcome him in, and he's actually pushed out and abused. And Zayd ibn Haritha, who's with him, just the two of them are in this place of difficulty. But the idea is that that didn't actually go the way that they wanted it to go. And this is an important thing to understand and reflect upon, because aside from like difficulty, if you remember, we talked about Taif like weeks ago, and we wrestled with this question of, well, like Allah loves the messenger of God, and he went through this difficult experience at Taif. So how can we reconcile the idea of being beloved to God and going through difficulty? That's not what we're talking about here. Like the nuance here is understanding a little bit of what does success fundamentally look like from the standpoint of our religion's paradigm. And the notion isn't to equate everything to just materialistic success or worldly success, and that's the definition of success. But if one was to take a bird's eye view of this account of Taif, the Prophet left everything behind, because we're going to talk in a bit that he's got to figure out a way to go back into Mecca, because practically speaking, nobody there has his back anymore. So he didn't abandon those ties thinking that he was going to go to Taif and get pushed out. He went thinking that he would go to Taif and it would work. And it didn't work. And this is happening close to the end of the Meccan period of the Seerah, but there's still going to be more than a decade in his life. And experientially, what is transpiring now is one of many like difficult moments. Like we're going to see this when we talk about Uhud. At the Battle of Uhud, like we lose, we don't win. Do you know? But the idea is not to equate success in that sense of what is like typically worldly. And you can draw upon this in numerous instances within our tradition's history, right? You see individuals who are outnumbered, they are out-resourced, they are not, for a lack of better words, like victorious in a worldly sense. When Imam Hussein alayhi salam stands at the plains of Karbala, like an entire army is against him and those who are remaining in his family, and the tyrannical army, like at Karbala, massacres this family of the Prophet of God. But his success is not in the acquiescence to what is tyrannical in a worldly sense. His success is that he stays true to his values and his ethics. And people remember him for who he was, and they remember the opposition for who they were. And you think about that now in the prism of what's happening to the prophet of God, like how he keeps going is rooted not in what is outward, but what is rooted as a constant theme in terms of conviction, in terms of belief, and how that informs ethics and values. And he's pushed to his wit's end, but he still keeps going after this for more than a decade. He doesn't stop. Why is this an important thing for us to understand and reflect upon, right? Not the idea of why difficulty comes, but now my response to difficulty. Like, what are necessary ingredients that enable me, despite life pushing me down, to keep going and to keep moving? And you don't want to undermine what happens here, because when he sits with Adas, he sits after miles of walking and not having an awareness of how he ended up where he was after he was pelted with these stones. But he takes a moment to rest in between, right? He pauses, he breathes. And in that moment of rest, there's opportunity for recentering. There's opportunity for assessing, like, where do I go from here? And it's not from calamity to calamity and stress to stress, nor is it anxiety that makes the decision, or grief or sadness. Those emotions are there, we know, because it's called Amal Huzn, right? It didn't stop being called Amal Huzn like just for a moment or an hour, but the entirety of the experience is called the year of sorrow. So we know he's in a state of sorrow. That's why it's called the year of sorrow. And despite it being that, he still has movement forward. Like, he continues onward in response to the heaviness and the difficulty. You see what I mean? And it's still a very human experience. We want to be able to extrapolate what is it that's happening that allows for him to have continuity, that isn't pack up and just kind of, say, I did what I could and now there's no room to keep going, but he's still moving forward. Do you get what I mean? And this is not in a vacuum. It's after he's seen, like, companions being persecuted. His wife has passed away. His uncle has passed away. Like, he's had heaviness upon heaviness upon heaviness. And his reaction to the difficulty is to rest with consciousness, not to rest as an escape from reality, but a means to enhance the understanding of the reality he finds himself in, and then still determining how it is to move forward. Does this make sense? And this is why you can't treat it as just stories and names and the memorization of dates, but to think about, well, what contributes to one's capacity that even when everything is falling around you, I'm still able to have that inward capacity, right? So when he tells Mu'adh bin Jabal years later, prior to his almost passing from this world, and sends him away and says, we're not going to see, when you come back here, I'm probably not going to be here. One of the advices he gives to Mu'adh, ittaqillah haythuma kunt, that be conscious of the divine wherever you are. This is an inward experience. Iman is inward. Taqwa is inward. You don't hold it in your hand. The experience of those things, like shaping some of this in a sea of difficulty, right? So I'd like for us to do, just so we can kind of get started talking, what do you think it is that brings him to that place of movement despite the difficulty, but also as a mechanism of enhancing understanding through the difficulty, right? He didn't just pack it up and give in and go back, because we're going to talk about it in a bit, but you already know that he's not going into Mecca and saying to the Meccans, I got it wrong, I can't do this. At least we have Abyssinia. Let's just kind of fold it up here. It's too tough. Do you know? And you want to be able to think out, well, what contributes to that holistically so that I'm able to embody those parts of the prophetic example. Do you know what I mean? And see it as a holistic experience, because we're going to get knocked down, right? A lot of us are getting knocked down right now. Jobs are hard. I can't find work, financial insecurity, family is tough, parents are this, spouse is this, siblings are this. And it's not a religion that denies reality. We don't live in pursuit of romanticized notions and ideals or chasing after utopian-esque scenarios. Islam is about reality. What is it that he has going on that helps him to move forward in the prism of this reality? Because I want to harness that for myself so that when the world gets heavy, I get knocked down, I don't stay down, but I keep moving forward in pursuit of and through the contentment that I'm entitled to be able to have access to. And in thinking that out, what also gets in the way that makes that a reality that's difficult to harness for some of us? Do you see what I mean? So I'd like for us to talk, if you don't know the names of the people next to you, exchange some names. Like, what do you think contributes to his response being what it is? How is that something that's fundamentally possible? He's experiencing grief through death. He's been pushed out from his own community. He's now experienced more than a decade of persecution. They went through a boycott where they were dealing with famine, like they were eating like boiled like leaves from trees. Do you know? They're not easy circumstances by any means. You don't want to compare it in an unhealthy mode of comparison. Reflection is not, why am I bothered by what I'm going through? Look at like the hell they went through and they got through it. That's Shaitan just getting into your head. Don't give Shaitan victory over you, right? The subjective nature of difficulty and pain is measured through metrics of where we are, and it's not healthy comparison. It's an unhealthy comparison. So push that out and just think objectively. From what we've been talking about over the course of the last year that gets us to this point, what is contributing to him being able to not go into a frenzy when like the world outward is chaotic? He's still inwardly in a place of balance. Do you see what I mean? And for us to assess that can help us if we can deem it to be tangible, like my want of it enough is not going to give me acquisition of it, but it can be the first step in then saying, well, what like gives me the steps to obtain it as best as I can? So I am not in this facade of patience that is not like you're a beast of burden. You know, you're not a donkey holding somebody's baggage. That's not patience, right? Patience is rooted in resilience. It's rooted in other things. You see what I mean? So you can turn to the persons next to you. What does he have that enables him to respond in that way and react in that way? If you don't know the names of the persons next to you, like exchange names and let's talk about that, and then we'll come back and discuss. But go ahead. Yeah. Like, how did he? What does he have in terms of characteristics, experiences that enable him to respond in those ways? The Prophet alayhi salam. Yeah, it's okay. No worries. How's that?
You're on the phone. Had you looked at it? You know when you were in the hallway, you were on the phone. I said hi.
When I was with my sister?
No, earlier than that. I had seen you on the phone. I was right outside volunteering, and you were on the phone.
I don't believe so.
You had a prayer.
We prayed at 6:40.
Yeah, because I had seen you right before I came to my said. Then they said that they prayed, and I don't remember saying any of those. I'm worried that they said before. I mean, after.
No, I mean, were you in here when we prayed Maghrib? Because I prayed it out loud.
No, I prayed outside, and I thought Maghrib wasn't yet.
Did you pray Maghrib already?
I prayed it now.
Yeah, so you're fine.
No, I'm worried that I didn't pray outside.
When I saw you the first time, Maghrib had not come in by then.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's what I was worried about.
yeah, okay. It's good. Good. Okay, so what are some of the things that we're coming up with, right? Like, from a worldly standpoint, Taif didn't work out. It wasn't successful in the immediate. Later on, like you go to Taif right now, everybody's on the deen in Taif, mashallah, right? But at that moment, like it didn't go well, and then he kept going. What does he have that makes him keep going? Like, how does he continue to keep going? Do you know what I mean? What did we discuss? What came up? What did you come up with? Yeah.
We were discussing, and I think we came to the conclusion that the Prophet's resilience and the resilience of anyone who has Iman essentially comes down to Quranic principles itself, right? And there are two of them, I think, that are important here. The first one would be, Inna wa'adallahi haq, the promise of Allah is true. The second one would be, Sabrun jameel, patience is beautiful. When we understand that the promise of Allah is itself true, the battle between truth and falsehood in our lives, we're never going to get tired because we understand that what the end of the story is, right? But we understand that no matter how difficult things may get, whether it's politics or whether it's domestic, whatever, no matter what difficulty enters into our lives in the battle of truth and falsehood, we always know the end of the story, and that's what makes us not tired. Secondly, although we understand the end of the story, it still becomes difficult, right? Because that's how life is. But when we understand that patience itself is beautiful, it makes bearing these difficulties also beautiful. So not only are we not going to tire in our effort to search for the truth, but we are also going to experience joy and pleasure at the sight of even beauty, of difficulty, excuse me. And this reminded me of the words of Sayyidah Zainab, the sister of Imam Hussein, when she said, "Ma ra'ayta illa jamila." After all of her family was killed, she said, "I saw nothing but beauty." So these are things that we just discussed, and I feel like when we have this combo of Quranic principles that the promise of Allah is true and that patience is beautiful, really it's a recipe for success, and it helps me in my day.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Right? It's rooted in like actual conviction, right? There's a root in value. He's living the text. Do you know what I mean? You're going to say something? You're going to say the exact same thing? I thought so. That's why I picked him first, just because I know you'd want him to say it before you. Yeah. Other thoughts? What else? What else is coming up? Yeah.
It's sort of like building up on that. There's also the aspect that like the Prophet
Awesome.
like believed in the importance of that mission. Like this is the greatest thing that mankind will ever like hear. So like he understood that this is bigger than him. This is about the salvation of people. So like in the face of so much difficulty, he was able to remember that and like push through like whatever difficulties he faced because he understood the importance of this mission.
Yeah. Amazing, right? And sometimes an intentionality that's bigger than the self can give us a certain form of love that breeds courage. So if I'm doing for you because I love you and you have a love back for me, like your love gives me courage and my love for you gives me strength. Like it enables me to keep going. He's carrying on him like in his back, like just everybody. And that can be burdensome or it can be liberating. Do you know what I mean? But the nuance is important to understand. It's also okay to do things for yourself, right? And it's really hard to love fully others when you don't like yourself so much. That can become an obstacle, an impediment in this way that I sometimes get overwhelmed because I don't know how to deal with certain things. He like knew when to stop here, right? Like it's clear it's not working. We got to move on. Do you know? You were going to say something?
Well, I forgot the city name that stoned him.
Taif.
Yeah, I can't say it. But so when I am familiar with the hadith, even though I know like after that incident, Jibreel alayhi salam came down to him and he asked Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam whether he should stone this city, the people in it, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam stated that no, maybe like their like children could be among the believers, subhanallah. And it also shows that like Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam he wasn't controlled by his emotion at that moment. He also put his wisdom above in that situation and the mission itself, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon him. Another thing I wanted to mention was that oh my gosh, I forgot. Yeah, I forgot. I'm so sorry. I'll come back if I remember.
You can't get to that place if you're not taking care of yourself. Do you know? And you think about how systems and structures are purposely built to just exhaust us, to utilize the best of our energy, the best of our hours, not even just outwardly in pursuit of things that render complacency at the expense of contentment, but inwardly, like get us to a place where we're not even paying attention to some of this stuff. And my sense of self-care and wellness, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, it goes out the door. And the only times then I am in a place where I start to recognize things that are inward are like when they're manifesting in ways that I can no longer deny it. I am just like completely in a place where I'm devastated. Do you know? When I started working here in my 20s, I started working when I was 22, right? I'm turning 42 this year, alhamdulillah. And when I was 29, I got shingles. Shingles, if you've ever gotten shingles. Has anybody here ever gotten shingles before? You've gotten shingles?
And I fasted for the first time.
Oh my God. That's crazy. MashaAllah. Shingles is not a fun experience, right?
It was okay for me. I caught it early.
Yeah? Yeah. Well, now that we've established that I'm a wuss, right?
Painful as childbirth that we're taught.
Is as painful as childbirth? Yeah. Yeah. To make us feel better about ourselves. So when I got shingles when I was 29, it was after probably 6 or 7 years working here, self-talk rooted in I can't let anybody be here for me because I have to be there for everybody else. I was getting sick all the time. My weight fluctuated a lot. I get very heavy, very light. I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. And I woke up with this illness that is like very painful, especially at that time there wasn't vaccines for people my age. And essentially it manifests as blisters on a nerve track. If you had chicken pox, the virus stays dormant in your nerve system. When you get to a high level of stress and low point of immunity, it manifests in these blisters. And when I went to the doctor, they said, it's going to hurt a lot. It's going to feel like somebody's rubbing a hot iron on your body as they stab you again and again. And there's more to like the experiences that we can kind of extrapolate from it. But for the purposes of this conversation, my body had to implode on itself for me to no longer be able to deny all of the other signs that previously were telling me, you're not taking care of you. You know? And we're going to see in this instance that comes up at Nakhla, after the Prophet hasn't even like washed himself of his wounds, he's going to stop in the middle of the night and he's going to pray tahajjud. Qum al-layla ila qalila is something that wasn't burdensome obligation, but a tool for recentering and remedying the inward. He has like good friends and companions that he's willing to bring intentionality of this is who I'm doing this for, right? There's a sensibility to the person he was married to, Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, like a love unlike any other love, that as devastating as his loss was of her life, like they still had a sense of wellness in the home because it made sense that they married each other. Do you know what I mean? A recognition of how it was that his overall sense of self-care and wellness was not attached to outlets that were escaped from realities, but mechanisms to enhance the realities. And when he had doubt or when there was like uncertitude, he knew who to turn to with his words. You're going to get knocked down if you're turning to things that give you temporary satisfaction or numb pain, because they're just there to numb, not actually create healing or remedy things. Do you know? And that capacity to deal with difficulty is not how do I respond to the difficulty when it comes as if it's in a vacuum, but what am I doing in terms of my overall wellness prior to, after the fact, when everything is great and well, so that I'm not bringing myself to a place where I deny the signs that my mind, my body, my heart, my spirit are telling me that I'm running on empty or something is just not right. And who are the people that I surround myself with that also help me remember, like, this is not who you are. Do you know? Zayd ibn Haritha is there with him. The angel Jibreel is there with him. Adas is there with him. Do you know? But having the opportunity that we talked about beforehand to let people actually help you when you're in a place of need. And to be in a place where you have a sense of like my overall wellness kicks in before all of this happens. So when Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha passes away, like what we talked about before, there was some days that the Prophet didn't leave his home with the regularity that he left before, right? Why do you go to work the week after your loved one passed away? Why don't you take time off when you need it? You know, this woman came to see me who's in her 40s. She sat in my office. I never met her before. And the first thing she said to me was, I want to marry somebody that my family does not want me to get married to. And I was like, oh, walaikum salam. How are you? And as we were talking, you know, she said, like, my family does not want me to marry outside of my culture, this and that. And I talked to her about self-care and wellness. And in the middle, she was mad. She was like, I can't do this stuff. Like, why are you telling me these things? I'm a consultant. I'm going to be in 3 different time zones for work before I fly into a 4th time zone when I visit my family at home. I'm going to be so exhausted. And I said, sister, it's not my marriage. So if it's not important enough to you that you take a week off from work, like, why are you doing that? Right? And the idea isn't to be in pursuit of this false sense of success. Taif didn't work out. The success of the Prophet is not rooted in just merely worldly acquisition. He doesn't even know Medina is going to happen. But he's in a place where his sense of what success defined can also only be realized and remembered if, like, he's not compromising on the state of his inner for the acquisition of what is external and outward. Who cares if you're married if it's going to make your life miserable? Who cares how much money you have if it's going to be a fitna for you? Like, the compromise on this then comes in a place where it's not actually compromised, but in response to heavy emotions, we make decisions not with foresight, but in response to the immediacy rooted in pain. And then later on, I leave the door open to look back with regret. And I lose sight of the fact that there's something bigger that I'm in pursuit of that enables me to see truth as truth and falsehood as falsehood, and like still have the energy to keep going. It's remarkable that Taif doesn't work out and the Prophet still keeps moving. And it's not intangible. You just have to think about the obstacles that are purposely placed into your routine that are there to exhaust you. So you continue to purchase that which just numbs and doesn't really give replenishment. Do you know what I mean? And then the heavier things in life, may Allah make it easy for us, they're not knocking us down just because they are heavy in and of themselves, but there's pre-existing exhaustion that I'm now trying to hold heaviness when I was already running on empty. And you can look, and people who look at the prophetic tradition, they look at the prophetic example, when we see, like, in sum total how much the Prophet slept in a day, it might not have been all continuous at night, but adding in what he was sleeping in around the times of Fajr, in the afternoon, the Qaylula, like some of our teachers tell us, he still slept about 7 or 8 hours in a day. Frustrating situations can be more frustrating when you're not sleeping properly, you're not eating well. Do you see what I mean? All of that's like there, and he's on this journey and he's readied himself for it in a way that it's not devoid of a sense of foresight, because it's just raw emotions that are heavy that are now defining it. But in relation to the emotions, he's maintained still a sense of balance that doesn't allow for imbalance to be what dictates and defines. And many of the metrics of success in a worldly sense that we're surrounded with are rooted through pursuits that one can argue are from imbalanced sources. And so he makes dua that, Ya Allah, make the risk of Ahl Muhammad quta, like sufficient, enough, not extravagant. I just want what we need to like help us go by. Have you ever sat down and asked yourself how much money is enough for you? How much wealth is enough? If you don't know the answer to that question, you're going to chase after stuff, and it's insatiable, and it's not going to give you contentment. If anything, it's going to come at the sacrifice of contentment. Do you know what I mean? And some of those things could be heavy. He went through difficulty, it didn't work out. You might argue with family. People who are related to you might not know what you actually like need and are about. You might have to leave behind certain things. He's literally leaving behind people who disagree with him, who have known him since he was a child. but it contributes to his wellness. Like they're wrong, they're wrong. The conviction and the iman and the ethics and the values of sabr and recognizing it as a thing that's actually beautiful can only be maintained when he's not living in accordance through dissonance of people who are holding him down or making conditional their love for him, and he can't forego like what it is that he knows to be true in order to just yield some temporary satisfaction or safety. Meaning, like, sometimes you might have to fight with family. Sometimes you might have to fight with close friends. Sometimes you might have to fight with your inner self in pursuit of getting to that place of wellness. And to me, success is I want to follow the way this man lived so that when the world knocks me down, like it's just knocking me down in the physical sense, not in the emotional and inward sense. I don't want to go home and take the stresses of the world and yell at my children as an unhealthy outlet. I don't want to be silent in a kind of weird way around my wife. I don't want to be miserable. And he's still known as like the smiling one, despite these things happening. Do you see what I mean? And a reality check that's not rooted in self-deprecation, but just basic things. Why wouldn't I respond to heaviness in the ways that I respond or choose the choices I choose based off of how it is that I'm taking care of myself like fully and wholly? And is it worth it? Do you see what I mean? When the Prophet also moves forward from this, like Taif didn't work out at that point in time, right? Sometimes some things are just not going to work out. And you have to be in a place where you let it go. If he's not willing to let it go, the people of Taif and Zayd ibn Haritha, including the Prophet, they might have gotten killed. It could have been devastating. When emotional angst defines and dictates, and there's not foresight rooted in conviction of what I'm working towards, and I'm more worried about what would people think and what would people say, or the unfamiliarity of it, I can make choices that are also short-sighted, that I don't know how to walk away from something that's not working. Mecca didn't work, so he had to go find someplace else, but he didn't say, Taif just has to work, what else am I going to do? It didn't work, and then he had to move on from it, right? He didn't stay in Taif and say, well, I'm going to try this for this much time. Clearly, it wasn't making sense. And that's a hard thing when there's so much other stuff attached to it. But sometimes, clearly, the relationship doesn't make sense. Sometimes, clearly, like the endeavor is not going to work out. Sometimes the life circumstances are not going to land where we ultimately think they should land. The Iman Billah enables us to say, I tried my best, and Allah is the best of planners. But that can only work if you believe in the God that is the God of Muhammad, and not the God that you conceptualize as an angry old man in the sky looking for a reason to punish you because you take the words of those who claim to speak on God's behalf and weaponize religion to tear you down, to now create an unconsciously formulated depiction of the divine. He knows who the God is that he believes in. A paradox to decision making is that when you don't make a choice, you've essentially chosen. And if you have an unconsciously driven understanding of the divine, that's going to be problematic when life gets difficult as to what's the purpose of this difficulty and how do I keep moving forward. Success isn't quantifiable here. It's qualitatively understood that he's still responding the way that we know he would respond. Now I just have to say, like, that's part of the sunnah too. And what brings that about is a sense that, like, he as a whole person is taking care and letting people also provide care to him who actually have genuine care for him. Do you see what I mean? When the Prophet leaves from this place now, he's going back to Mecca, right? Zayd ibn Haritha. It's like, what are we going to do? How do we even get into this city? We basically cut off ties. This didn't work. Like, we're stuck. The Prophet pauses at a place called Nakhla on his return from Taif to Mecca. And You want to understand this not in a contemporary sense, right? Like I'm traveling, there's a rest area. I'm traveling, there's like a service area. There's nothing, and he has nothing. Like he didn't get to say to the people of Taif as he left, by the way, can you give me some clean clothes? Can I take a shower in one of your homes? Right? Adas was only given by Utbah like grapes and water, right? And you remember we talked about selective compassion here. Like it might seem like, oh man, like they gave the man is bleeding on their front lawn and they're like, here, give him some grapes. Do you know? Their giving is not to make him better, it's to make themselves feel better in response to whatever it is that they're experiencing. Do you see what I mean? So he is still in this state, traveling back now, walking from Taif to Mecca, and he stops in the middle of the night and he still prays tahajjud. It's important to understand this because his engagement of the practice is not something he abandons even in this difficult state. But the ability to engage it in that way is a paradigm shift that isn't, hey, Fajr is an obligation for me, right? Rabi al-Basri, may Allah be pleased with her, a spiritual master of our tradition, she famously says, I will not serve God like a laborer in expectation of my wages. Like the doing is not so I gain in return. I just do because I want to do. There's love there. And you don't want to undermine the capacity of that tahajjud prayer, prayed with the intention of what it's supposed to do. In the midst of the night, there's no one that would fault him for not doing this. He's still praying like tahajjud. Ya ayyuhal muzammil qum al-layla ila qalila. Why? Like, why is he doing that? And the idea isn't like when you read hadith that say, pray as if you how you have seen me pray, to focus just on the mechanics and the postures. But that thing means something different to him. And then it enables him to yield from it a sweetness that only salah and dua can. He knows who it is that he is communing with in the course of that prayer. And he knows that as a spiritual exercise, what the yield can be from it. And even in a state where he is like broken down, he's engaging it not out of fear of what happens if I don't do this thing, but out of a sense of like it's going to give to me only what it uniquely can in a moment like this. Why does the Prophet not leave tahajjud behind at that moment? Right? We're still in Mecca. The mandates of certain things have not been established as they will in Medina. The interaction of Isra and Miraj is disputed as to when it happens, but we haven't talked about it yet. Do you know what I mean? So in understanding like where the obligation of 5 daily prayers come in, in that conversation between the Prophet and God, like 50, and then Musa alayhi salam says, go back, your people won't like do this, and back and forth until it's 5, and you'll do 5, but it'll be written as 50, right? Like he is at Nakhla with Zayd ibn Haritha, who is worried about how we're going to get into Mecca, and the Prophet decides he's going to pray tahajjud. Why does he do this in this moment? Like, what do you think he's gaining from that experience of that practice? If you can turn to the person next to you and like think out this question, right? Like, what is the actual yield from this? Do you know? Because Quran tells us like this is what salah like has the potential of resulting in. It's a spiritual exercise. Do you know what I mean? The same way, if you run up and down some stairs, you'll benefit from it. You lift some weights, you'll benefit from it. You engage in practice. Like it's not a ritual that's just for the sake of it. It's a spiritual exercise. What is the point of this spiritual exercise that he's engaging in that he won't even leave it behind in this instance? You see what I mean? So we can talk about some of this with the person next to us, because we want to then incentivize for ourselves as well. Like, why am I not doing this thing when I'm able to? Do you know? So we can turn to the person's next to us. Like, he's doing this even in this state of exhaustion. There's got to be something there. Like, what is the thing that it's doing for him? We can discuss, and then we'll come back and talk about it. But go ahead. Okay, so what are some of the things that are coming up? We're gonna stop probably in like 15 minutes to make Isha. So we'll run through a few things really quickly. But what are some of the things like that are coming up? What did you discuss? Like, why do you think he's stopping after all of this? Covered still in like his own blood, like clothes messed up. Like, why? Why is he doing this? Yeah.
I have a theory. Well, Prophet Muhammad SAW was the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obviously he had completely different relationship than all of us, he was the chosen one. So like, even though there were people around him who would help him, like even just talk it out, all the situation that happened, I feel like the most beloved being that was that he can entrust with all of his feelings was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So like even as a child, like when you fall down and when you get hurt, who do you run to? You run to your mom or your dad, and they're the most safest and beloved people to you. So Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he doesn't have that person at that moment. So who's he's gonna turn to? Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think that tahajjud is the most sweetest because it's the middle of the night. No one's gonna bother you, and you can literally pour out all of your heart, and there will be no distraction while you're doing that at the same time. So maybe that's what it was. It's kind of well, let's find out knows best.
So yeah. Other thoughts? Yeah.
It's a weird comparison that I have, but I was saying it to the brothers like the way like I've used a lot is like kind of like boxing. So like this life is like a fight. So in between rounds, you're going to your corner and you're talking with your coach on how to adjust to the next round before you go back out there. So the way I was viewing it, in regards to this story with the Prophet, peace be upon him, was he was still keeping, he was still doing, Tajid, forgive me for the mispronunciation, because he know that like he has Allah in his corner, so he's going back to like, okay, like this is what happened. How am I gonna adjust to it? What is gonna be the next plan for maybe the next day or the next hour, stuff like that.
You were gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think in that moment he knew that he needed something that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could give him. He needed hearts to change, and so that would be kind of the first and only place to turn. And the Hajj is a time where you don't have to wait until Fajr, you don't have to like keep things pray, and kind of there's that immediate connection. So it almost was like there was nothing better, more important, or helpful he could have done in that moment.
Yeah.
I think this goes back to the taqwa of Allah, like always being conscious of Allah, that Allah is there. Even during the trials and tribulation, he still remembered Allah. He still remembered that Hajj was something that he always held on to. I am late. So it's like, subhanAllah, sometimes when we go through trials, we forget that Allah is there. Allah gives us out. He descends down. He tells us we can pray to him. And Allah's going to answer that dua. And that's what true consciousness is of Allah, that Allah's always there. But I think sometimes, humans, we have our shortcomings. We forget that Allah is there. But that's why we have to form true taqwa, like the Prophet ﷺ.
And all of these things, if we were to like take them to a point of like logical conclusion, it then brings him benefit, right? Like it brings him replenishment, it brings him strength, it brings him positivity. The consciousness doesn't make him walk on eggshells, it makes him bold enough to keep going. Do you know? The stillness of the night, like no one's there to interrupt him, it's still like then empowering him. It's a source of strength. The uniqueness of exercises is like if they're done right, they can actually like help. And if they're done with consistency, they can bring benefit. You've never like jogged in your life and you decided tomorrow you're going to go jog 10 miles and then you didn't jog again for 3 years. And you're like, man, I can't believe I'm so out of shape. What did you do? Like, there's no strategy there. Do you know? And having a patience that says, like, I'm not going to go wake up for tahajjud. I'm struggling to even get up from my desk to pray asr or dhuhr. You go at a pace that makes sense for you. You're not in competition with anybody else. But you can't gain from the exercise what you're able to gain from it if you don't do the exercise. And if you're not perfecting the exercise in terms of its mechanics, then it's not going to work in terms of the yield. And some of what brought him strength in the midst of all of this is that he was consistently like willing to listen to something bigger than himself. And that verse is still there. Ya ayyuhal muzammil qumil layla ila qalila. So why would he not do that when he knows that he trusts in what Allah knows to be best for him and allows for it to be a sense of strength? If you distract yourself through the vantage point, like all these other things can be true, but if it fundamentally yields an absence of the practice, then the practice can't do for you what it can only do when you're practicing upon it, right? But sometimes we leave it behind, not because like we're incapable of doing it, but we haven't really understand like what its role is, like what the point of it is. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, well, you're bad if you don't do this or that, right? No, like if you think about it in these myopic terms, like you're not thinking about it. Like the nafila, the hadith tell us, right? Like its purpose is the increase of love. And just think about it. If you only do what is obligatory, then you have to do it, right? And if you have to do it, that's removing the ability to want to do it because you have to do it, But where you now have like what's optional, you're doing it because you choose to do it. And that's where the breeding ground of love can be. I don't have to go and buy a gift for my wife for no reason. But if I want to do it, it like speaks volumes, right? It's not fard for you to give salams. It's a fard kifaya to respond to the salam, but you should want to like greet people and acknowledge their presence. Do you see what I mean? And if you want it, that's going to breed love. And where did it start from the beginning? Love is what gives courage and endows with strength in ways that other stuff just simply cannot do it. Do you know? And so that tahajjud, like it's actually doing for him what it's supposed to be doing because he's doing it with the intent of what it's intended to be done through. Do you see what I mean? And he's not letting it go because he knows like what the purpose of it is. And when he's like exhausted, he's going to do what gives him strength, not like let go of the things that give him strength. Do you see what I mean? Why do you stop eating food when you're not feeling good? When you feel sadness, you don't feel sadness just in the palm of your hand. You feel it in your entire body. I just don't want to eat. Not wanting to eat doesn't mean you should like not eat. Like you might have to you might not eat a feast, but you still need to have some type of replenishment because you're dealing with the sadness and then you deal with the physical exhaustion from not eating. That's not a recipe for healing. That's a recipe for prolonged like sadness being devastating of you, right? So you don't maneuver around the sources of strength. You engage in like the sources of replenishment, the acts of kindness and charity with reason, right? He still gives him time, space to process like the passing of his loved one. Do you know? And all those things could be true and like coexist. If we open up the 46th chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Ahqaf, its 29th verse, the Mufassirin now attribute these verses like to this instance in the prophetic biography. The Prophet is praying his tahajjud. He's been like essentially distanced from all types of humans in Taif. Adas, like, supports him, and angels come, like the angel Gabriel and the angel of the mountains. But the Prophet is still like doing this on his own, right? He protected Zayd from the pelting because he said they will they know like Zayd will be killed because Zayd ibn Haritha doesn't have the protection in this tribalistic society that the Prophet is assumed to have because the people of Taif don't know necessarily what he left behind in Mecca, right? And so he's in this place and these verses are attached now to this incident. Can somebody read them? Verse 29 and verse 30, the Arabic or the English?
Don't be shy, it's okay.
Thank you for being encouraging and positive. You're the best. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Should we do one of these again? Yeah. This is great. Well done. Yeah. Yeah, go for it.
Remember, O Prophet, when we sent a group of jinn your way to listen to the Quran, then upon hearing it, they said to one another, listen quietly. And when it was over, they returned to their fellow jinn as warriors. They declared, oh, our fellow jinn, we have truly heard a scripture revealed after Moses, confirming what came before it. It guides to the truth and the straight way.
Okay. So in understanding this, right, like these are jinn, and in our tradition, we believe in angels who are creatures of light, jinn made of fire, humans made of clay, like there's worldly existences. And the Prophet ﷺ's tahajjud that he's praying is audible, and these jinn are kind of like engaged through this recitation. They're hearing it, and Allah brings them to the Prophet in this moment. These verses give us some insight into what our tradition understands, like the nature of jinn, because that second verse we like read the translation of, like the jinn are referencing Moses, peace be upon him. And the understanding in our tradition is like a continuity, like a Old Testament, a New Testament, and then a final testament within a Quranic sphere. But like these were jinn who knew of Moses, peace be upon him. And jinn are understood in our religion to have the capacity to have faiths, to have religions. So these ones adopted Islam. And prior to, the verses indicate that they lacked, where we're likely practicing like Judaism. And they see this as a continuity of what Musa alayhi salam is teaching, right? But in the nature of what we're talking about here, right? One, you want to place incidences in conjunction with the Seerah literature. And two, like recognizing that Allah is giving the Prophet an indication that even if creation of this world is leaving you behind, creations that still exist, in realities that we might not be able to perceive, they're still there and they have your back. The Arabic of this says that these jinn become mundhirin, like warners. So it's not just like, hey, we're in this, but they go back and they tell their own people. And we're going to talk later on, like there's instances now where like large delegations of the jinn like come and sit with the Prophet alayhi salam. An instance is called Laylatul Jinn. Ibn Mas'ud like narrates these hadith that talk about some of this stuff. But the Prophet here is still in a place where he's not being left to his own vices. Like there are things where even like if humanity is rejecting you, like there's other aspects of creation that are still there, that are listening and hearing. And you think about success in different ways. Do you know what I mean? If the Prophet did not stop to pray tahajjud, this would not have occurred. If he did not say Bismillah to Adas, like it wouldn't have happened in the ways that it happened. Do you see what I mean? You can't think about your practice just as your own. Like sometimes it then bears impact in other ways, right? Somebody comes and they've never been here before and they walk into an empty room. That might bring them a lot of solace, right? I just need alone time. But also sometimes when the world is heavy and you're the only Muslim in your space, you're the only person of your background in a space, you want to come into a space where you find people who kind of get what it is that you're going through. And you might have just come to pray dhuhr or asr or come to a halaqah or an iftar, and your presence might have been exactly what somebody else needed. But if you didn't come to do it, they wouldn't have met you at that time. Do you see what I mean? Right? And you want to think consequently how you can't be in the place to do what's needed if you're not there in the first place, right? And not think in very kind of tunnel vision ways about practice in these ways. Do you see what I mean? So these verses pertain to this, and they then go in, and we'll talk later about what kind of happens. The Prophet ﷺ now, he is trying to get into Mecca, and he has left, and he's got to figure out how to re-enter into Mecca. And he's got to be able to reach out now to the sub-clans and tribes of the people of Mecca, because Banu Hashim, like Abu Lahab is in charge now. Abu Talib has passed away. And Abu Lahab, he, like we talked about some weeks ago, he like offered protection temporarily and then was in a place where he reneged because of like the urgings of these other people. He can't turn to certain tribes because certain tribes are run also by people who hate him, right? So the Banu Makhzum, like Abu Jahl is like part of the Banu Makhzum. So he's got to be strategic and try to think out like, okay, what is it that I can do? And Zayd ibn Haritha, he's not going to be the one to walk in. He's got no power in this society, right? Zayd ibn Haritha's connection to all of this is like his relationship to the Prophet of God, do you know? So they're in this place now. Well, how do we kind of move around this? And so the Prophet first reaches out to a man by the name of Al-Akhnas ibn Shuraik to see, like, will he be able to help? And he responds back saying that we're not in a position to do any of this, right? The second person he reaches out to is a man by the name of Suhail ibn Amr, who we're going to meet later on because of his kind of connection to the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Do you know? Both of these men become Muslim later on, right? So the Prophet knows like who it is that he's engaging in this time, right? He has like this strategy in this sense of well-being. And so one of the people that he reaches to that inevitably, like eventually, like helps him is a man by the name of Mut'im ibn Adi, right? Who we've talked about before. That Mut'im ibn Adi was kind of helpful in different regards, the boycotts happening, other stuff. And so Mut'im ibn Adi, he like offers the protection to the Prophet of God. And he protects him in a way where like his own sons come, they're like carrying whatever weapons they're carrying. He tells the Prophet of God to go and make tawaf around the Kaaba, because even in their tradition, this was something that they did. They came into Mecca, they had a reference for the Kaaba itself. And as he's walking around, the chieftains of the tribes of Mecca approach him, and they are in a place where they're asking of him, like, are you following him now, or are you just protecting him, right? Abu Sufyan, it says to like Mut'im ibn Adi, like, I just want to know, are you like his follower, or are you just offering him protection? Because this is the way their clan-based society worked. Like, you were under somebody's protection, everybody else has to honor it. And he said, I'm just protecting him. You know, I don't follow him in this, like in what he's teaching, right? Which is also crazy to think about. Do you know what I mean? Because they're having this conversation in front of him. Do you know what I mean? Right? Like, it's like you're sitting down and your parents are talking about you in front of you, right? He's so stupid. Like, I don't really get. It's like, I can hear what you're saying. Do you see what I mean? Right? But he's got to keep taking like all of this as it's happening in front of him. Do you know? And the strategies are still rooted in a sense that this is bigger than me. But he is now back in Mecca, and he is able to stay under the protection of this like grouping for a good portion of time. But just in the interest of time, we're going to pause here. What I'd like for you to do, just turn to the persons next to you. Like, what are some of the things that you're taking away from tonight's conversation? Some of the things that are coming up. And then we'll kind of just discuss for a bit, and then we'll stand to pray Isha. But go ahead.
Oh, he was there.
I was thinking about it like the opposite.
Okay. So what are some of the things we're taking away as we wrap up? Maybe we can get one or two people. Yeah.
That's like I was saying before, like sometimes you tend to forget, like everybody was a convert at some point, right? Like us, a lot of us nowadays we're born into sin. So it's like, you hear these stories like these people actually like lived a life before, and they were influenced by this man, and then we tend to forget like everybody had a first encounter with this person or heard about it and they converted to Islam. So I tend to forget that. I always feel like everyone's born Muslim, but obviously history says different.
Yeah, and to kind of build off of that, Mutaim ibn Adi, like he's not Muslim. And it's important to understand that the Prophet is building alliances and collaborations with people who come from different walks of life, right? And he can't get to where he got to without that relationship. Do you understand? And you don't want to have myopic. I'm not saying you're saying this, but just so we're clear, like the other two men, they eventually convert to Islam. Mutaim ibn Adi, like he passes away shortly after like this occurrence, do you know? But through him, like there's benefit, right? And you'd want to like be able to navigate some of that in a recognition that like people are able to help like people because they're people, you know what I mean? And you don't want to write off people or only think that you can prioritize in certain ways, right? The Prophet couldn't have had the protection he had any of these men been Muslim at that time. Because Abu Sufyan, when he asks Mutaim ibn Adi, like, are you following him or are you just protecting him? He said, I'm just protecting him. He says, then we're good with that. But had he converted, they would have fought them too, right? It wouldn't have worked. You see, he strategically needs somebody who's not part of his faith to be helping in that regard. Because Umar ibn al-Khattab, Hamza, Ibn Abdul, like they're all still there at this juncture, right? Like, but he's turning to these people. Why? Right? Like, there's got to be a plan, a strategy. What else do we take away? Maybe one other. Yeah, go ahead.
If you read Quran, there's a lot of ayats that talks about how Prophet Muhammad like stresses over his own ummah a lot, and every time like if I feel like I actually made a whole list of like those ayats. There's like more than 50 ayats that talks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu like, hey, listen, like don't worry, like them converting or like to Islam is not up to you. You're here as a messenger, and that's it. You can give the message, but it's up to them to accept it. Like, don't stress over. And that kind of connected to the fact that taking care of yourself, because this is like sometimes we have people in our lives that like may not be as religious as we want them to be, not because we want them to be religious, but we know what happens at the end if they're not religious, if they're not close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Like, oh, he might go to hell or she might go to hell, you know? That's the end. So we care about them so much. So, and sometimes it stresses us over, but then that kind of also resonated with me. And I'm like, and I was thinking as you were saying, like taking care of yourself, like sometimes you just have to leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah, and in our theology, accountability is individualized. Our religion does not say that just because you're Muslim, you're going to heaven. Just because you're not Muslim, you're going to hell. If anything, we're taught about the munafiqeen, may Allah protect us from being amongst them, who outwardly express Islam but inwardly detest it. So they claim to be Muslim, but they're said to be in a lower level of Jahannam than even the mushriks, right? So, you know, Allah is like Allah. You let God be God and you be you, and you just do your part, and like God's gonna get done like what God has to get done, right? Okay, so let's take a pause here. The rest of the week, there's a bunch of different things happening. Friday night, our professionals group is having an event. On Saturday, we're doing something on healthy relationships with Pillars of Peace, which is a domestic violence agency that was started outside of our community. Sunday, there's going to be a film screening of a new PBS series on Islam in America. And then a bunch of things that are happening next week too, but try to come to these things. It's a pretty heavy time for a lot of people, generally speaking, but also, with the specifics of everything that's happening in the world, we're having an election kind of cycle that's all the more looming over. Being in space with others and in community is a good way to just kind of find replenishment. So even if the content of something you feel like doesn't resonate, just being with, others can be helpful, inshallah. But let's put the chairs against the wall. If somebody wants to call the adhan, and we'll pray Isha, and we'll see everyone next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.